Members, it's time for us to resume the meeting. Next member, Mr. Charles Mock, 5 minutes. Chairman, about cyber crimes and this post of Chief Superintendent at the Cybersecurity and Technology Crime Bureau of the Police, CSTCB. This has been brought to this session from the last. We know that there are more cyber crimes. The problem is serious, and we know that the police needs more resources to tackle cyber crimes. In fact, human resources for this bureau has been increasing in recent years, but our concern here is how you can strike a balance so the public have confidence that this bureau and also this chief superintendent will really seek to combat crimes. Given the political atmosphere in recent years, we see cases about communication on the internet, and the police has used your human resources and other resources to target what people say online, and also whether people plan to march or protest. In other words, you are doing political surveillance. Why this post has been dragging on? I remember a few years ago when you first brought it to LegCo, you did not get on to a good start. At the time, we asked for more transparency. I'm not asking you to tell us everything you do because you will be alerting the lawbreakers, and that would hamper your enforcement work. But the public are indeed concerned as to what this bureau is doing. I remember we argued about where it is. You say it is very secret, but in the end, some people identified it online as in Wan Chai, and then we asked to pay a visit. Again, you say it's very secret. I hope when this bureau becomes more mature, whether or not you get this post, I mean, sooner or later you're going to get it, you have to understand the hope of the public for a balance to be struck. They want to know what you are doing. The civic society has been concerned about prosecution using the offense of dishonest intent to use a computer. That is why this post has been so controversial. Perhaps I should allow the Undersecretary and the police to respond. That is how you can balance between the public's wish for more transparency. Transparency doesn't mean revealing your technology so you alert the criminals. But the public do want you to spend resources on combating crimes. How can you make sure that you can do that? Undersecretary. Thank you, Mr. Mock. In fact, I fully understand what Mr. Mock is saying. Indeed, the public should allow the police should allow the public to know that we are using powers conferred to us by law, and we would use lawful means to enforce the law. In this regard, the new chief superintendent is to allow the public to understand the risks of new technology crimes, how they can protect themselves and not become victims. And this person should also allow people to understand what types of cyber crimes the police has to tackle. There should be more education and publicity. Mr. Mock said we should allow people to know more the work of the CSTCB. I believe the police should review more the cases they are tackling. if the cases are brought to court, there will be reporting, but the police can be more active in disclosing such information to the public, who can then understand what the police are doing, and particularly so about international cooperation, how we crack down on cross-boundary and serious cyber crimes. Next, Ms. Claudia Mo. Thank you, Chairman. We are talking about cyber security and technology crimes. I'm just curious. We have 3.8 million electors' information lost. Have you got progress about this case, and have you received reports which might have something to do with this theft case? Can you update us on this case? Underset. Chairman, Ms. Mo. Mr. Mock referred to these crimes, and I don't have information about the investigation into these crimes, and also it's not for us to divulge details of cases under investigation. The details may be the focal point of our investigation. I hope you understand. Now we are talking about Internet police, and I'm still concerned about Section 161 of the Crimes Ordinance, and that is using the computer with dishonest intent. I am extremely worried. In fact, the administration demonstrated using this section as a political tool. This section of dishonest intent in using computer, it should be to tackle deception online or hacking. But if you incite others to embark on illegal acts online, this will be caught. So the wording is very vague, and the net is cast very wide, and people can be caught easily. Our smartphone is a small computer. If I say on my smartphone to my friends, we should all go to the gathering tomorrow, then, well, I don't know whether that gathering has secured a certificate of no objection from the police. I know or may not know it. But anyway, I would say on my smartphone using WhatsApp to ask my friend to go with me the next day.
I would have contravened this law, and the maximum penalty is 5 years of imprisonment. So this is a worrying law indeed. We are now creating a new post of Chief Superintendent. So can you first tell the public about any potential abuse? Under the Ordinance on Dishonest Intent in Using Computers, the police would practice caution. We have about 6,000 technology crimes every year. And only 10% involve dishonest intent in using computers. And of these cases, the majority are not involved to online speeches, and they might be about stealing client information on computers and terminal services attacks, disclosure of personal data leading to losses, or thefts of bonus points online, etc. in computer games. I'm very familiar with this ordinance. I know about the intent or dishonest intent, etc. But would you deny that during the umbrella movement or subsequently did you invoke the dishonest intent in using computers against those who took part in the movement? When someone violates a law, the police has no other choice than to deal with the incidents based on the laws. You are trying to invoke a piece of law to your advantage, the police would not consider political intents or motives when we carry out enforcement, and we would only look at whether a crime has taken place. The context or stance would not be points of consideration. Whether a person supports the government or supports the movement or not, it would not be a factor of consideration. In past FC and PWSC meetings, I have expressed my reservations towards the creation of this post. The police has not reassured us that those using instant messengers would be protected, and on the other hand, their privacy would be compromised. I've raised a number of questions. Before I ask questions for this item, I want to quote a passage from the former the former judge of the CFA in a case involving Mr. Leung Kwok-hong. The judge said, if communications privacy is not protected, then communications would be hindered. Covert surveillance should not be banned, but they must be monitored, and the monitoring must convince the public that their basic rights and freedom, especially rights and secrecy of communication, would be safeguarded. I'm quoting this passage because when I asked whether the police or government used hackerware or whether they inspected information in devices, the police and government came up with different claims. For example, to do otherwise would affect operational efficiency, etc. They try to dodge this question. The ordinance passed in 2006 could not cover the new ways of communication in recent years. We must amend the relevant ordinance, and for instant messengers like WhatsApp or other software, that way you can protect the privacy of users of the software. I've asked a lot of these questions before, and the government did not offer a clear answer. For instance, whether they did use hacker software. To quote what the secretary said himself, he said, when investigating any crimes and when devices are investigated, the government must, the police must be capable, so they will certainly be capable of dealing with these devices. From this quote, I understand that the police does not deny the use of hackerware or ransomware. In terms of privacy of the public, and according to the former judge's speech, he said surveillance is acceptable, but you have to ensure the privacy and freedom of communication. So again, I'd like to invite the police to tell us whether you used hacker software to crack into or steal information of the public, and if so, what guidelines do you follow? Chairman, what I said last time and today wanted to bring the same message. As permitted by the law, the police would exercise certain powers regardless of means. Regardless of means, they must be legal and allowed by the law. In terms of interception of communication and personal data, the legal requirements are very strict, and there is a commissioner Chairman, I must interrupt him. The law cannot catch up with technological advancements, and that ordinance was enacted in 2006, 10 years ago. The Security Bureau said the same things. The former Director of Operations of ICC, Mr. Kwok, said it's not practical to apply to the courts every year, and Mr. Lee Siu Kwong said such practices would be inefficient. But we have to update our laws. Well, I will follow up on that later. Dr. K. Kwok, 5 minutes. Chairman. I believe that a lot of people are concerned about technology crime since there are more and more internet frauds. But in recent years, we are equally concerned about the relevant powers of the government and police. They can use the same tools to influence or even manipulate internet users. And this is not new to us. The Undersecretary said they are fair and impartial and they have no political motivation. When you look at the politically driven prosecutions in recent years, not all of them might be related to technology crime, but a lot of people were targeted after Occupy Central. If you say the government, DOJ, and police are completely impartial, just like the statue in the former electrical complex, I don't think anyone would believe you. You are asking us for so much money to create this post, and at the end, they are not performing the intended function. So you are giving the government more resources to carry out what they want to do in the name of fighting internet crime. The government can carry out selective prosecutions anytime through the collusion between the police and DOJ. We have seen that. There's a crime called dishonest intent in using computers. Well, this is a fits-all crime for basically every scenario, given the circumstances. If you try to convince us that this is not politically driven, then it's very difficult. Privacy International came up with ratings of the 8 worst performers. China is top of the list, followed by Russia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and United States. The police nowadays has close ties with the mainland. I'm not sure how many exchange tours you visit every year, and rumors have it that you will be the new secretary. And China is notorious for internet censorship, so we have our concerns. Is there any transparent mechanism in place on the about so that they would know the work of the Technology Crime Division? As Mr. Charles Mok said, everything you do is secret, but and only some people would know about it. Is there any way the public can know whether you are carrying out surveillance in the name of fighting technology and internet crime? Undersecretary. Chairman. I've stressed that the police and any other enforcement agency would not be politically motivated. I think this is not the truth. Today or yesterday, there was a case pending appeal, and the people involved did not support the illegal Occupy Central movement, and he lodged an appeal, and the appeal failed. In terms of enforcement, the police would not consider political stance. We would only consider the contravening behavior. So I have to stress this point again and over. Please don't impose your personal views and stigmatize the impartial law enforcement agencies. I'm asking about the mechanism. Is there any transparent mechanism so that the public would know whether their privacy is protected? Your time's up. Please wait for the next round. Mr. Ted He, Undersecretary, you talked about the views of members, but our views actually represent the concerns of the people. Of course, we would support fighting financial and related crimes. We would support the police on those. But on the other hand, we are concerned about political surveillance or prosecution. And these are reasonable concerns by members and the public. You said for illegal behavior, regardless of political view or camp, you would follow the law and you would carry out surveillance and make arrests where needed. But we do have some malicious laws. And we are talking about laws that might be easily abused by the police. For example, dishonest intent in using computers. This crime can be easily manipulated by the police. The Law Reform Commission and the public have said that the scope of this crime is too wide and it can be easily abused. And it's not properly amended yet, so we are concerned about abuse. For illegal assembly or an assembly involving 3 persons or more, you can make prosecutions. If 3 persons create a Facebook live feed, then they might be arrested. So this offense can be easily abused, and this affects freedom of expression and speech. We still have these malicious laws. It's very hard to strike a balance. And you fail to provide some information. For example, according to the paper, during enforcement and investigation, you would request internet service providers for raw data. Sometimes these providers refuse to provide the information, but you fail to provide the relevant figures. How many of them rejected your requests and you failed to inform the council of that? So these are reasonable suspicions by LegCo. And in terms of interception of communications, some members doubt whether their WhatsApp accounts are being hacked. The ICIO is outdated. For example, bugging device, communications device, and they include telecommunications or postage. So would WhatsApp be included? So nowadays we are talking about hacking instant messengers or mobile phones. You have to clarify that. In present times, the police force has often been sandwiched in the middle. What you have done recently shown to be politically inclined, and that led to a drop in confidence in the police. So you have to tell us you have to give us very clear answers, or else I would not support this project. On Mr. Hui's points, first of all, for crimes that involve a political context, and if there's illegal behavior, if there's a political context to illegal offenses, it will be a case of political prosecution. I'm talking about malicious laws. I want to clarify that regardless of political context, the police has only one option in the face of illegal behavior. Do you think that all laws are perfect and would not be abused by the authorities? So if there are malicious laws and you try to reinforce your manpower, then you are trying to you are making things worse. All laws are enacted after a democratic process. If you do not agree with a specific piece of law, you should resort to legislation to amend or abolish it. Whether or not we have a specific piece of legislation or not, I would still have to create this post on technology crime. Whether or not, well, as we have said before, whether or not you agree with dishonest intents in using computers, I still need a chief superintendent. This is the same for the drug offenses. You still need the post whether or not you agree with the crime or not. Dr. Fernando Chang. Whether or not we want to abolish a post gives us some food for thought. According to Wikipedia, the police force of Hong Kong ranks second in the world and first in Asia in terms of manpower to population ratio. The police is the biggest department of the government, and in the internet world we have more and more internet crimes. So in terms of detecting and preventing internet or technology crimes, it's certainly justified to increase resources, but the police force is now the second biggest force in the world in terms of manpower to population, and we are top of Asia. Do we need to constantly create these posts? Should we move with the times, and can we actually cancel some other posts or transform them so that we have more resources against internet crimes? So this is certainly reasonable. You should not constantly increase your manpower. You're already the biggest department within the SAR government.
So should the government seriously consider whether you have looked into carefully, whether the resources and manpower in the police are really not needed, any extra resources, any room for reduction? Whether it's in the during the colonial era or in the SAR, I think you need to consider that, to reduce extra expenses. And secondly, online police is really something that requires public belief that we can enjoy basic freedom on the internet, and we can enjoy protection there as well. If you want to have covert surveillance and monitor suspected criminal activities, I see that. But based on the commissioner the latest report issued last year, he said that there are 9 cases in which there are suspected or suspicious behaviors, and the commissioners for interception actually reprimanded the people concerned, and among the reprimanded were the police officers. So it's worrying, what was found or identified in the report by the commissioners on interception of communications. When Wu Kok-hing was involved in the interception investigation, he criticized heavily offenses made by law enforcement officers. So these things has been ongoing. So how can the police or the security bureau ensure the public that with this new post, you would not repeat what happened before or put public protection at risk? Okay, the first question is about the resources and the high proportion of resources for the police. Under Secretary, Mr. Zhang raised 2 questions. Let me address the second one first on the covert surveillance and interception of communications. The Commissioner's annual report done reflects a stringent and proactive monitoring. We agree that we need to make sure that everyone abides by the law. And it's exactly that we have designed this system so that there can be stringent monitoring. So the commissioner concerned, once he detected irregularities, made a report, and it showed that the monitoring is effective. And let me now address the point about high proportion of resources within the police comparing to the overall population. If we use 100,000 people as the basis in Hong Kong, that is for 100,000 people in Hong Kong, there are 399 police officers. New York has 401, Paris 448, Chicago 486 police officers. So we have a high proportion, but there are still countries with even a high proportion of police officers as opposed to the overall population. So we should not forget that Hong Kong's crime rate is low. 825 in Hong Kong. That is, there are 825 cases per 100,000 people. Compared to New York, its crime rate is 2104, double that of ours. In London is 8710, almost 8 times ours. In Tokyo, 1,200, so several times ours. Of course, every time, well, in every place, they may use a different formula to measure the crime rate, but you can use the figures for crude comparisons. That means the crime rate in Hong Kong is because of our policing methods and population that really accounts for that rate. Chen Chi-chun next. Let me respond to Mr. Johnny's points made. I heard that the secretary, after July 1st, he will be promoted to be the secretary. So in the future, we have much chances of discussing the issues with him. Just then, you made some analogies which I found very unreasonable. You said that if we don't agree, or if we think that the drug ordinance is bad, then we cannot, because of that, remove the Narcotics Investigation Bureau. Of course, LegCo has no power to remove any of your divisions. Today, we're not here to discuss whether we should replace the Cybersecurity and Technology Crime Bureau. Here, today, we are talking about increasing resources for this bureau. If we think that the relevant ordinance for this bureau and its past performance is problematic and we want to make improvements, then we must use this chance to speak out. And whether it's through the enactment of legislations or increasing resources, manpower, or upgrading equipment, it's not that the police the more officers there are, the well-equipped they are, then the better the performance will be. I'm sure the Undersecretary will understand that we need to strike a balance after all. And we do hope that there will be monitoring of the police by electrical and the public. Therefore, I just asked about dishonest use of computers. 161 under the crime ordinance. Sometimes the weapon against it could be abused. Sometimes, well, I'm not being political here, but I just want to see that the Bureau is honest with their figures. Therefore, in the establishment subcommittee, we discussed a lot about the data. For example, the establishment subcommittee's paper was submitted in February. Now it's May. I can see that its statistics were up to September 2016, the latest. I don't think this funding request will be passed today, and I hope that the Secretary could update the figures for us. Say 161, statistics under 161 in the paper last time is providing up to September last year. In the past, we were discussing whether there could be some sorts of breakdowns, and the Undersecretary said they didn't have any breakdowns. He made all sorts of analogies like before, after burglaries and so forth, or break-ins. Well, looking to the future, is it possible for you to give us better breakdowns to help with our analysis? And just don't say that we are trying to, politicize things. Can you just give us all the information? I said that, well, of all the statistics you provided, well, there are cases of several hundred people. Well, I asked for breakdown, but he didn't really address that. Can you give me a response today? Yes, thank you. Let me clarify about the Narcotics Investigation Division. I'm talking about the Chief Superintendent for that bureau. Well, let me reiterate, we should not, on this latest application for the new post, it should not be tied to a particular ordinance, because whether an ordinance should exist, it's about whether the law itself is needed. So it's nothing to do with the manpower needed to fight a crime. They should not be linked together. And just Mr. Chen Chi-chen's request for statistics, we're trying to provide what we can. And thirdly, we discussed dishonest use of computers. How can we provide more information on that, including the 4 categories and nature of cases? Last time, we said that in our system on collecting data about crime, we will try to, through the system, resolve any questions or issues Mr. Chen or the committee has. We will provide more information on dishonest use of computers, and we hope that through the system we can find out more, take out more for you. And we are looking at the workflows, including collaborating with the judiciary, to see how we can accommodate your requests. I believe that by the end of this year, we will have a decision. Roy Kwong next. Chairman, ultimately it's about trust. It's not that we don't trust you. We don't trust the police. That is, when the post is created, that we wonder whether the freedom of netizens will be restricted. It's really sad why there is this mistrust. You need to review it. You have such a big establishment as the police force. At this moment, it seems like there is an unprecedented level of mistrust between the police and the public. Now you're saying that you need this post to investigate online crimes. Nobody would object to that. But when you say that it's going to be linked to dishonest use of computers, I don't quite buy it. We all know that, say, if the superintendent has to do his work, then you can just use your weapon of dishonest use of computers that were like a all-powerful key that can really be abused. So as member, I need to find out get to the bottom of things. Mr. Lee, I know many people know that you're very capable in arresting criminals. But would you consider that once we have this extra post, that when this superintendent is hired, lately we've seen more and more restriction of online freedom. So will this post worsen that? Even looking to the future, say 10 to 20 years later, well, you're no longer the secretary, but we may find out later on that this exact post could have undermined our core value. So I'd like to ask you, 161, Cap 161, do you think there's any problem with this provision, in relation to dishonest use of computers? Are you concerned about that? That is, when the ordinance is considered in the light of this new post, don't you think that there could be potential problems there? If you want to get our support, I'd like to ask you, how can you ensure that the superintendent proposed would actually not help with restriction of people's online freedom? That is the freedom of speech. Undersecretary, Mr. Kwong mentioned about the legal provision concerning dishonest use of computers. It has been discussed several times in LegCo. There used to be a motion that ordered a detailed discussion of the issue. And the Law Reform Commission has already begun preparatory work to review the law. So I agree that since there are differences in opinions on the legal provision, I agree. Or the ordinance, I agree, we should review it. That's the function of LegCo. But ultimately, I hope you can be more understanding. That is, even in the future, LegCo overthrows the legislation concerned in relation to dishonest use of computers, the cybercrimes, the rise of cybercrimes and risk threat laws incurred by cybercrimes, the 6,000 cases are reality. So we must have a bureau to tackle them. Even if FC vetoes, if unfortunately, that would be, a bad news to society. Even if this proposal was vetoed by Finance Committee, the bureau will continue to function. If there's anyone who breaks the law, he will still be held liable. I think that we should not abuse any piece of legislation, not just the one we were discussing. And if there's any case of abuse, we have a stringent system to ward against that. Of all the cases I just mentioned, I also understand your concerns, but let me reiterate. Police force enforce the law without any political considerations. Whether you support the government or not, you are not allowed to break the law. Well, you now see the period when the public and the police are actually pit against one another. Yesterday, there was a suspect who hung himself at the police detention room. There were all sorts of suspicions in relation to the case. So the relationship between the public and police have to be improved. Otherwise, nothing can move forward. Uncle Hong, 5 minutes. Chairman, the Undersecretary, well, he's going to be the next secretary. I personally will put a lot of weight on what you say, because what you say is likely to be continued, not like, some other secretary, not like the present secretary. I have written a couplet for you both. That is, the public don't trust the secretary. Let me say this again, the public don't trust the Secretary. Simply put, dishonest use of computer, the crime in relation to that, it should not be actually held as a crime. I don't know why it's now become a crime. Dishonest use of computers. I mean, you can be dishonest with anything. Dishonest use of, knife or big knives. The crime involved should be hacking people, the act of hacking people. So this is a really suspicious offense, in relation to dishonest use of anything. And it's also a challenge to the rule of law. So even if there's such a law overseas, I don't think that it should have been made a piece of law, and we're not even in a place threatened by terrorism. So introducing this law is really unreasonable. And you just use it as a way to accuse people. If you say that people commit crimes on the computer, then the worst is, or you steal people's data online, then it will be a kind of offense related to fraud. So it's all more about fraud under common law than anything. Now you have this new provision on dishonest use of computer. Not to mention the suicide case yesterday, the suspect in detention room. So the public was asking you have such a piece of law that can allow you to arrest or charge anyone you like. Therefore, Chin asks you to list out the breakdowns of cases that is in the past. Who have you prosecuted by invoking that ordinance or that piece of law? Or you have to list out the cases involved, and yet you didn't do that. You're willing to do that, and that's unreasonable. To me, it's a heavy offense according to the law. Dishonest use of computers could result in jailing of 3 to 6 months, and the police arrested would rather be charged with that offense than what they had committed. And so you could actually also abuse the law to cause someone to be given a heavy jail sentencing.
Say, for example, the crime of inciting a person to do this and that, and the penalty is 5 years, but dishonest use of computers, that causes an imprisonment of 7 years. That won't do. And your staff always confiscate people's smartphones, but the smartphone is a small computer. There is a JR case which has not been ruled on, and your staff member snatched people's phones in a march on the 1st of July. And then you begged the person to take it back, and the person said, no, I don't want it back. I will take you to court. It's a small computer. I'm involved in that case. Somebody cited it. In 2005, when I took you to court, the computer was not that widely used. The computer as a medium. At that time, we didn't have Facebook. You blame us, saying that, look, you are foolish. Even if the law is not updated, we will still have the drug cracking unit. Well, if that's the case, go to the DOJ to say you have bumped into great difficulties in LegCo, so ask them to change the law. Mr. James Toh, I would follow up from what Mr. Leung Kwok Hong is saying. I think he has a very strong point. You are applying for a post to tackle cyber crimes. As the Undersecretary said, he would not look at it from the political angle. But if your objective action causes this kind of worry, then I would ask whether I should give you more people to do this. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong cited an example, and I give you another one. I was at the complaints division receiving the public, but I heard Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, and the complaint was about stealing electricity. Well, one unit in a housing estate uses a connecting cable to steal electricity from another unit. But anyway, if you prosecute people for stealing electricity, the highest penalty is 5 years. But if under a certain situation, if it is the Occupy movement, and then you prosecute people with using the smartphone with dishonest intent, and you may see this transmitter box, and people are using the electricity from that transmitter box. But then you prosecute people with Section 161 saying that people use the smartphone to incite people to steal electricity. The entire crime used is different. It's a much heavier crime. And even if people have not connected to the transmitter box, you might still want to prosecute with that offense. When you go for covert surveillance, interception of messages, we are very careful, and we want to watch you closely how you deal with these offenses. We don't want you to be able to hide anything. Actually, I may not have the same viewpoint as other councillors, but to me, I view this with a lot of seriousness, like the ICSO. This is related to you. At the time when we enacted the ICSO, we said you may apply for warrants to search the internet service providers. If you apply for a warrant and you don't do it under the ICSO, you may get different things. It may not be immediate, but you can bypass the ICSO because the ICSO goes to the High Court, but this one will take you just to a magistracy. You can explain those are two procedures, but we'll ask you this question. We want to monitor your work. And through this meeting, I'm asking this question. What are the figures? Sorry, we don't keep the figures, you say. And then I would say, then you should start keeping the figures. And you say, we won't, because it has nothing to do with law enforcement. It doesn't help. And then we say, no. Well, we were scrutinizing the ICSO, and we said it would be helpful for us to scrutinize the law because we are executing our duty of law scrutiny, and you should start to collect the data. And you say, no, we are not going to do it. It was a very clear-cut answer. You say, no, because it has nothing to do with law enforcement. But we have already told you it is related to the LegCo's work in monitoring the government, and this has to do with the scrutiny of laws. And now you come to the Finance Committee. You want to create this post of Chief Superintendent in order for him to tackle cyber crimes, and it is possible that he would search some internet service providers. And then this is within your scope of work, and we want you to keep figures. I remember it was in June, the meetings concluded, and then by September, October, the Bills Committee resumed. And in those 3 intervening months, you could have done a snapshot of the situation, but you refused. I don't understand why. I can only say that there is this possibility, and it is my suspicion that there is a lot of abuse. You want to hide it. You dare not face the public. This is my suspicion, and here I'm going to continue with my questions. Mr. Leung Yu-chung, 5 minutes. Chairman, just now the Undersec said whether they would not arrest somebody because somebody has a political background. Even if he breaks the law, he will not be arrested. But I think it's very difficult, isn't it? If someone commits a criminal offense, it's very difficult for you to let him go. But what do you mean by political motives or political background? You would be the one to decide, right? We can hardly question you whether you do it out of political considerations, but that is our feeling. Perhaps it is because of political reasons that you take various enforcement actions. Today, we don't focus on that. We are actually most worried about abuse. Yesterday, CP went to Kwai Ching, and I told him 2 examples. And the officers abused their power. The victim had to go to the court. The court acquitted the person. But then the victim had already been subject to a lot of disturbance and harm. And very often, we can do nothing about the abuse of power by police officers. We can only hope the courts will be fair. But it doesn't matter to the police officer. And on the other hand, the victim will be so scared. One of the cases was that a lady was suspected to be involved in some undesirable behavior. But then the lady actually was found not to be doing anything unusual. However, the police officers went into the kitchen to say that they saw a chopper, and so the lady was suspected of involving in undesirable behavior. But the court, of course, acquitted her. And then another one was a mentally ill person. And when he was asked to give a statement, the police officer said he did not cooperate, and he was remanded in police custody. And the person struggled, and the police officer slapped him a few times. But then there was no evidence. And then the person came to us for help. And we told police officers that the entire family was mentally ill. You should understand the situation more. And then after full investigation, the police officers released him without charging him. But this is abuse of power. This is abuse of power. There are many other people who told us that at police stations, they would ask to make a call, but the CID would say no. This is abuse of power. I think this is quite common. You say we can go to Capel, but as you know, only very few complaints will be decided as substantiated. As you know, the Capel is for really the image of the police, but it is not really tackling people's complaints. I'm not asking you to answer my remarks, but these are our worries. And in fact, online surveillance is even more worrying, because you would say you charge people too carelessly. My question is, to follow up on Dr. Fernando Zhang, you have a big team. Can you not deploy somebody within the police force instead of asking for this extra post, Undersecretary? Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Leung mentioned a few things. Number one, if the police flout their guidelines or regulations, we have to make sure that there is an effective system to monitor police behavior. And also, when there are complaints, there should be a fair and just mechanism to handle the complaints. Mr. Leung mentioned the Capel. The Capel is an independent, and also there is the independent statutory body, the IPCC, which will scrutinize each complaint to make sure that they are dealt with fairly and justly. There are also different watchdogs in the different mechanisms. We mentioned the CICS, and in the end, the DOJ and the court would be the mechanism to see which person should be responsible for what under the law. And the court can comment on the police if they don't do a good job. And at the Security Bureau, we have to make sure that all these mechanisms remain effective. So LEAs will comply with the law and to make sure that the mechanism to monitor the behavior is in line with our guidelines. Mr. Ted Hui, 4 minutes. I think the police is determined to tackle cyber financial crimes and also cyber scams. I trust you in this regard. But I also know that you have some political missions. Of course, you will not admit, but this is the feeling of the public. I don't have to cite examples. I believe the police have been used by the powers that be in doing certain acts. My question for you is, you mentioned the ICSO. Do you think that the ICSO is updated enough that it can cover all behavior on the internet, that it can cover every aspect? Is it that the ICSO will make sure that the police will not abuse its power? Undersecretary. Thank you, Chairman. The first point made by Mr. Ted Hui, well, I would like to respond to that in clear terms. The police doesn't have any political mission. As for the ICSO, since enactment until now, it has been in use for many years, and we do think that the law can sufficiently deal with LEAs, especially when LEAs gather evidence to tackle serious crimes, that it is effective in watching over the police when they gather evidence. And effectively, the CICS files a report to LegCo every year, and when the report is scrutinized, the Secretary for Security will lead a team of relevant LEAs to face questions by members. I think the mechanism is effective. And we also believe that the ICSO is appropriate and it can help us face the problems we now face. Okay, let me put it again. Are you confident that the ICSO can watch over the police in whatever it does, that it is broad enough? Chairman, if the police makes use of investigative techniques that has to do with covert surveillance and interception, then I'm sure we are monitored by that ordinance. According to the ICSO, surveillance means intercepting conversation and monitoring other people's actions. Say if you go into my phone and computer and you look at my WhatsApp messages, do you think the police should act according to the ICSO and get a warrant first? Undersec. Thank you, Chair. I will not discuss every tool the police can use, but I think the present ICSO is sufficient in monitoring LEAs when they embark on covert surveillance and interception. In fact, the CICS will investigate into each case. Well, if you get my phone and you watch or read my WhatsApp messages, do you think you should first apply under the ICSO? Well, if you can't even answer that question, well, as I said, I would not discuss any tools that the police will use. But as described by you, I believe this is in the open, and if the CICS should find that this is not done according to law, I'm sure the CICS will do his work. You still have time. This is a new post. Will you, as a result, monitor or expand your surveillance of internet messages? And I'm not talking about political exchanges. Chairman, I said many times that we would only target law-breaking acts. We do not monitor communication. We target action and acts, whether they break the law. Moreover, when we take prosecution action against anybody, the court will be the best gatekeeper. If the police's work exceeds the bounds of the law, the police will be seriously criticized and they may have to be held liable. Ms. Elizabeth Quat, we know that cybercrimes have become serious. In 2012, only 3,000, but by 2015, 6,800 over, and a loss of $1.8 billion, and there is a growing trend. We, of course, hope that the police will do its best to combat cybercrimes. The whole wide world is boosting resources to ensure cyber security, and now we would upgrade the CSTCB and we add another post of chief superintendent to lead this CSTCB. I think it's just natural. I don't understand why members object, so I am listening to the discussion. Today many pro-democrats or Democrats mentioned their worries, and I can understand that because they are worried about political suppression. They are very concerned that when the CSTCB is strengthened, there will be people monitoring their WhatsApp messages, and there may be political prosecution, and maybe they will be arrested for criticizing C.Y. Leung on Facebook. Well, I think they are over worried. If you look at Annex 5, you will know who the police target. We are talking about online business fraud and also child pornography, distributed denial of service attacks, e-banking deception. There have been 1,000 more naked chat crimes and also blackmail, online, criminal intimidation, sexual exploitation, etc.
For miscellaneous crimes, we are talking about identity thefts, false claims or bomb hoax, claiming to be member of Triad Society, etc. So we can see all these are crimes. I don't see which of them are related to political crackdown or political prosecution. And it's impossible to incriminate someone because of speech. So I hope the pan-democrats would not make everything political. We are talking about protecting the public and companies from internet crime. And we want to ensure cybersecurity for Hong Kong. And we are targeting technology crime instead of yourself. So stop being, please do not be so paranoid and stand in the way of creation of this post as well as the relevant work. Can the Undersecretary please tell the pan-democrats that the technology crimes we talk about is not what they have in mind? Thank you very much, Chairman. Dr. Kwok. I stress that we are not politically motivated for the crimes we target. No matter which ordinance we invoke, we would look at the behavior itself when determining whether it's illegal. For illegal internet behaviors, for example, when invoking dishonest intent in using computers, we are dealing with bomb claims or covert photography by mobile phones, online thefts of bonus points, or online thefts of corporate information for personal uses, etc. Some are related to marketing. For example, inciting rape on others, and spreading news of closure of companies, etc. So we need to deal with this under the law. If we allow people to recruit female children for grasping, if we cannot allow these to happen, and the courts have dealt with them, and the courts agree that these must be dealt with. So it's right to instill confidence in the public on the police, but as Dr. Kwok suggested, sometimes we are imposing reasonable claims on the police, and that's unfair. Mr. Ma Fung Kwok, thank you. This is the Finance Committee. So on the need or urgency of the post, we already had lengthy discussions at the Establishment Subcommittee. Some members disagreed for different reasons, but at the end it was carried. The function of the ESC is to have a first round of discussion, and here we are making a decision in terms of finance. For a lot of points raised by members, they have been well discussed before. So do we still need to spend so much time today? Those who support it, well, I'm rather supportive of the government's proposal because the reasons have been laid out clearly under paragraph 7. The overall crime situation in Hong Kong has improved substantially, but computer internet crimes are rising. And in light of that, they came up with this proposal. I find this really reasonable. So I think it is well justified. And this has been dealt with at the ESC. So today we are dealing with whether we support the funding exercise. We should not go back and talk about whether this post is necessary. And this is not proper use of our time, or else we wouldn't need any discussions at the ESC altogether. I hope the chairman can lead us back to the right track on whether or not we support the funding exercise. We still have a number of outstanding items at the EFC. Thank you. I do not need an answer from the government. Mr. Ma Fung Kwok is very right. If we repeat what has been discussed at the ESC, well, for policy issues, they should be dealt with at different panels. Mrs. Chiu Ka-chun, I'm against this funding proposal. I'm against this funding proposal. I'm against this funding proposal. So I have made myself very clear. As Ms. Ma Fung Kwok suggested, Big Brother is watching you. And this was quoted from the British novel 1984. I'm not sure if I should be angry or amazed. When you use the computer, people are watching you. I was once a member of a fight crime committee in Xinhuan. In terms of crime fighting, I do not want to stand in the way, but in terms of what is meant by fighting crime, a lot of members talked about definitions. Hong Kong has grave concerns over the lack of checks and balances on the government's work or the police's work. have we considered protecting human rights? I hope that Mr. Lee would understand the intent. Please do not use the attitude that LegCo owes you money. Undersecretary, your name is Lee, not Feng, so do not take things for granted. I want to follow up on what Dr. Fernando Cheng said. And the crime rate dropped from 1,062 to 80/30 per 100,000 people. The overall crime rate dropped by 20%. But the police's overall funding increased from 6.6 billion to 8.03 billion, or a 20% increase. The crimes dropped. Why do you need more money? I represent the welfare sector, and the government always tells us to rejuggle our resources when the needs change. Then you should exercise flexibility and independence, and you should be able to manage your finances. You should rejuggle your own resources. So that's the story behind the block allocations. Dr. Quat mentioned these figures today. The overall crime rates are going down, and technology crimes are rising, so you should rejuggle your resources. LegCo would not interfere with the internal resource allocation of the police. Why can't you rejuggle your resources to respond to such crimes? I think a lot of personal email accounts of members have been hacked by national agencies. Every night I receive reminders that people are trying to hack into my account. If the attacks come from the intelligence agencies in the mainland, would the Hong Kong police be capable of following up? How would the police respond to such dishonest use of computers? Some members asked this question, but I hope Mr. Lee can respond to that. Thank you. Mr. Lee? Thank you. Well, as a government officer, I have the responsibility to explain our grounds. If and I have to tell you the impacts if the funding exercise is not granted. I respect the LegCo's powers or constitutional status, but I cannot forego my responsibility in informing members of the consequences, even though you might not necessarily agree. I sincerely hope that members would consider the consequences I mentioned. And secondly, when we considered creation of this post, did we consider allocation of resources? The police has 46 chief superintendents. We have considered their duties carefully, and each has to take up a specific scope of work. And they are already doing their best in their own roles. That's why we hope that LegCo can improve this funding so that we can introduce an extra chief superintendent. We are not asking for extra funding for the entire bureau. Whether or not we have this new chief superintendent, we face very real risks of technology crimes. We hope to lower such risks for the entire Hong Kong, and we are taking reference from different reports on internet security published in the US or other bodies in Asia, they are referring to the rising risks in Asia, and Hong Kong is even more vulnerable. So I hope members can consider that. Thank you. Mr. Eddie Chu, 5 minutes. Chairman, when responding to Mr. Nathan Law and Mr. Ted Ho, the Undersecretary used some very strange logic. When we talked about the ICSO, the government sees no need to amend it. The Undersecretary said the police thought that it's adequate. In other words, the powers inferred by ICSO to the police is enough. This is a grave misunderstanding of the law. The Interception of Communications and Surveillance Ordinance does not serve to empower the police. It is to regulate the use of power by the police. If certain acts are not covered by the ordinance, we should not ask questions from the police's perspective. We should consider whether the ICSO is updated to extend protections to the public on Telegram and WhatsApp, so that the information would not be intercepted by the police or retrieved without monitoring. So that is the fundamental difference. In recent years, several countries have enacted relevant laws. For example, in 2016, UK passed the investigatory power bills. It was heavily criticized. But at least the law included a double lock mechanism. So when the government asks service providers for personal data, or when before they hack into computers, they must obtain approval from the Home Secretary. And there's also a judicial commission which would grant approval. We don't have these things. So for the same behaviors, for example, hacking into other computers or asking internet service providers for information, no permission is needed in Hong Kong. And in France, they passed an Intelligence Act in 2015. So it was used to fight terrorism. And due to needs of anti-terrorism, the judiciary's approval is not needed before hacking into other computers. But the act was challenged shortly after introduction. And the Constitutional Court of France ruled it to be unconstitutional, and the government had to go back to the drawing board. And in California, there's a California Electronics Communication Act, also enacted in 2015. Court warrants are needed before retrieval of electronic communication is allowed. Why is the Undersecretary only considering whether the police is given enough powers, instead of considering whether you are unbounded in your obtaining of information. So this is a key theme to the discussions, and that is whether the government will promise to amend ICSO to incorporate electronic communications in the regulations so that our privacy can be protected. Undersecretary, Chairman, Mr. Eddie Chu did not hear what myself and other colleagues said about the ICSO. He only extracted what I said in one of my answers. If he has followed our discussions on ICSO, I pointed out that apart from cracking down on serious crimes, we need an effective monitoring mechanism to make sure that no one makes contraventions and to protect human rights in Hong Kong. And that would cover our operations on how they would fulfill legal requirements. Mr. Charles Mok, 4 minutes. Chairman, a number of members talked about the crime of dishonest intent in using computers. I've been talking about it for years, and the government refused to provide classification of crime, so I don't want to repeat what's been said. The Undersecretary said he intends, well, for information of different cases, there was no classification in their system. But in the future, can you provide more information? Undersecretary. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mok. The relevant information is extracted from the crime information system, and it's used by the police and other enforcement agencies. We understand requests from members on the classification of crimes on dishonest use of computer. So we've been looking with the judiciary on whether this system can be used to so that the government can, or the police can keep records on cases involving dishonest use of computers, so that we can satisfy the members.
So we have started a study to look into, for example, the workflow of collecting figures and the investigation of crimes, how we can comply with the 4 categories under CAP 161. Sometimes cases can be very complicated. Therefore, with the judiciary, we are studying how we can try to enhance the process to meet various demands. Chairman, it seems like you've made some progress, but I'm not going to ask you for a timetable. But I'm concerned that if you are trying to come up with breakdowns to satisfy us, I do hope that it can be more interactive. You have your own ways to sort out the cases, for example, to break cases down into the 4 categories. But maybe what ends up may not really satisfy what we want. I can't go into much details here, but I do hope that after your discussion with the judiciary, you can really sit down with us again to have exchanges with us and see whether we may have some counter proposals or other opinions and so forth, so we can take into account our views, rather than you discussing or deciding together with the judiciary and then tell us what your decisions are and which do not really satisfy us. So can you then, I'm not asking you for a timetable. Of course, I do think the things should be sped up, but can you sit down with us again? Undersecretary, yes. I think what's easier will be for us to say whether it's Mr. Mok or any members who have your request. Maybe you can give us an integrated proposal. And then we can incorporate your opinions, your suggestions in our upcoming study. Yes, okay? That would be fine. Okay, one more question here. Well, how about timetable then? Do you have a timetable in mind? Undersecretary, I think we are discussing the matter with the judiciary, so we do want to speed up the work, and I understand that electrical and various subcommittees will be concerned about the matter, and we will act quickly. Well, Kwok is not here, Nathan Law's not here, so Lang Kwok Hong is the one left. Nathan Law's here. Okay, Nathan Law first then. Chairman, are you very tired, Chairman? No, I just didn't see you because you always came in and out. Okay, you can start. 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. As we just said, there are issues with the monitoring of the government's power, in terms of collecting information from the public, which could invade people's privacy. That's a big concern to us. When we talk about the amendments to the pervasive surveillance and covert surveillance and interception of communications ordinance, and the secretary said that it's adequate to protect privacy of people, but that's not what we think. Because as technology advances, we are using a lot of communication software like WhatsApp, which are all not covered by the ordinance concerned. So now, if there are changes in technology and the law fails to catch up, resulting in gray areas, then people with powers can, because of the loopholes or the gray areas, invade public interests or rights. So we need to speak out on this. We're not just after legislative amendments or reforms, but what about the damage done to the public because of loopholes in the law? So electrical must actually exercise its power to monitor the government. And just then we heard also that what the government is doing now, including what it says is constitutional or legal. We don't know. We're not sure about that because we've seen precedents in which the police or the law enforcement, if, for example, intercepted communications would try to come up with new laws. I understand why James Toh just then was so emotional, because 20 years ago the same kind of dispute happened. In 1996, the Law Reform Commission issued in April that year a study on the interception of communications. Back then there was none regulation or monitoring at all, and the report is said that the Telecommunications Ordinance and the Postal Service Ordinance had provisions that did not guarantees Article 17 of the International Covenant on Protection of People's Rights. So the officials back then sounded like you. They all said that what they did was constitutional and legal, but later on it turned out that what they did was not unconstitutional, and there was a need to improve on the law. And in 1997, when the Interception Ordinance was passed, there was no commencement day of the ordinance, and the government said that should the ordinance be implemented, it could seriously undermine law enforcement authorities' work in protecting Hong Kong and tackling crimes. So it sounded the same as what you just said. So we wanted to have more protection for privacy, and yet the administration would say that if we told you how or what we can do to monitor, then the criminals would be better prepared. Then I want to keep on reciting or citing cases of crimes, but I think the administration all along has failed to answer our questions or address our concerns. So I would like to suggest that we should adjourn the meeting now. Okay, you propose to adjourn the meeting. You have 3 minutes. Okay, as I just said, similar disputes had happened again and again. And the government and law enforcement agencies always try to evade the issues by saying what they did was constitutional and legal. That's not right, because as technology advances, in order to protect human rights, when you put weight on human rights protection, then the courts and the powers of the law enforcement authorities should be further restricted in order to protect people's rights. In 2004, there was a case which is called TC689, in which it's pointed out that Hong Kong did not have laws on monitoring covert surveillance and interception of communications, and that's contravention of Article 30 of the Basic Law. So the same dispute happened 20 years ago, and more than a decade ago, the court ruled that if you try to, in public areas, monitor or have covert surveillance, or try to pick up conversations on the next table in the public area and use that as public evidence, that's unconstitutional and illegal. And yet, back then, what did the officials say? It's similar. It's the same as what the Undersecretary had just said, that all the acts that were taken were constitutional and legal. That is, if any piece of law against that was passed, then that would be actually undermining law enforcement. And in 2006, we passed the surveillance and interception ordinance, which overturned all the excuses used by officials before. Why did I spend so much time talking about what happened in the past? Because we've seen the same thing happening now. In the past, you think they're using covert surveillance was sort of accepted, but without acknowledging the invasion of people's privacy. And later on, police also were given the power to have covert surveillance, but now all the communication software are not covered by the law. I don't know whether the police use hackers, or whether they would try to collect information by hacking into our software on our phones. We don't know. And every year, the police has 4,000 cases of collecting information about the public. We don't know what those cases were. And the police, when they confiscated handsets or computers, they had the power to log into the machines to access personal information, and there's nothing we could do. So can't we now act to protect public privacy? I really want to adjourn the meeting because what the Undersecretary has just said didn't really make much sense to me. You said that Cap 161 is unfair. You said that if it's unfair, then it should be amended. But look at electrical. Now, this electrical, is it a electrical of justice? Of course not. Half of it is composed of seats representing the functional constituencies. And if the government wants to get funding support, then they will just force it through. When did this electrical ever represent what the people really thought? And now you're saying that if you are conscientious enough, you know that this electrical of injustice is not protecting public interest. Therefore, we need to use the powers, all the powers we have, to try to minimize injustice. Cap 161, Justin James told made it very clear. He asked the government to list out accusations which differ from Cap 161 to show whether there were any cases of political censorship. And also, as for freedom of speech, he said that online opinions or inciting people to rape online, those could be covered by the law. But that's what people are fearful of. Maybe I said something to Claudia Mo, maybe I said 777 is a bad person, can we put a slap on her face? And then you said no, if you slap on her face, then that would be a violent behavior. I could be accused of inciting Claudia Mo, and you can also charged me with dishonest use of computers because I was WhatsApping her or communicated with her through the computer. So this is an examination of a piece of law that would be problematic if it's used by someone who's abusing his power. The environment, the situation of Hong Kong is deteriorating. Just then I heard from the establishment camp that the law will not be abused. Of course, if it's under one-party dictatorship, then the law will only be used against its opponents. The law will be used by whoever is in power against its opponents only, but it cannot be used the other way. So I hope that in LegCo we can maintain justice. It's not that we don't support the work of the police. I'm sure the public wants the government to do its work, even in a better way. But in recent years, we've seen many unjust accusations which are disappointing, so that therefore we cannot really support this funding request. Claudia Mo, 3 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I just heard from Ma Fong Kok that in the establishment of committee we discussed it all already, so there's no need to talk about it now. So you are really trying to subvert the entire FC. What had not been discussed before at panels or other subcommittees? So is it that at FC we are here only to vote on or against proposals? That's it? So there's no room for further discussions here? Because you are not a member of all panels. So have all members joined the establishment subcommittee? Have all members joined the security panel? No. So it's really ridiculous what he just said. So, okay, back to the crime of dishonest use of computers. I really find it very problematic. I'm not a member of the establishment subcommittee. Looking at that piece of law, I find that it's really open to all kinds of abuses. You can really apply it to whatever sorts of acts. You came up with all sorts of excuses, and yet you can just use this dishonest use of computers legislation to target anyone you want to, as long as you say that that person has an intent to commit a crime. So I don't quite see how you can prove someone's intent. And now you said that you would consider this and that. So your logic is that you cannot, just because you disagree with something, or you don't think something is a drug, therefore we should not have narcotics commissioner or increase manpower in the narcotics bureau. I think you're not really talking reason here. As she said, Hong Kong's crime rate is so low. I agree. Hong Kong is one of the safest cities around the world. Besides the good job done by the police, I think the quality of the people is also a factor. So you did not compare it with that in New York, the crime rate, how high it is there. But at the same time, crime rate here is low, and police and yet have kept increasing its manpower and resources. And you're talking about online crime. It got me worried, because from what I know about China's online monitoring, it has the biggest online police in the world. Next one, Leung Kok-hong, 3 minutes. Is Ma Fong Kwok here? So he just, I think he shows that what's worse is if the king makes the mistakes and there are people, he exemplifies people who would still continue to say the king has been right. Even if the king said that the triangle has 4 sides, those people would still say yes, would agree with the king. Just as we were discussing with you the legal framework. And then Our point was that even if you invoke the dishonest use of computers law, when you try to collect evidence by hacking into someone's or confiscating someone's computer for inspection, whether you needed to produce a warrant, and you said we don't need to. But if you had to, then, I don't think you need a warrant. Because, as I just said, the case I just mentioned on July 1st, the protest on July 1st, and you confiscated the driver's handset. You asked him to open it and he refused to. And you tried to return the handset to the driver, and he said that they will lodge a judicial review, and they begged him not to lodge a judicial review. So, same for computers. Well, smartphones are like computers now. So you must give a reason. Once you have the dishonest use of computers provision, then the loophole in the Interception of Communications Ordinance can be seen. And there are problems with the law, with that piece of legislation. Under common law, you should charge whoever is accused of a crime with a lesser offense, if that's around. You said that you were trying to crack down on computer crimes, and you needed to invoke that ordinance to crack down on computer crimes, but not necessarily. If someone asked someone to kill or to commit a murder online on the computer, and then you could accuse that person of a lesser crime, even without invoking the current legislation. There may not be precedents for all sorts of crimes. There's no precedent for maybe a jail term of 7 days. Okay, next one. Chen 3 minutes. I understand why Nathan Law moved to adjourn the meeting because he thinks that the Interceptions of Communications Ordinance is not adequate for monitoring the government in today's cyber world. Because if you consider all sorts of acts the government can commit to invade people's privacy. He asked the Undersecretary for whether they have software to hack into people's computers.
And whether, the Undersecretary said they would not do anything illegal, but actually you can't really ask that question because there is no legal definition of malware. Why don't you just directly ask the police whether the police are hacking into people's email or the communications systems in order to read citizens' messages, and also what the citizens have watched online and have chatted nakedly or not. Is it that the police has the technology to do this and whether they have actually done it? The law lags behind technology. Whether they prosecute suspected criminals or whether they bind law enforcers, in both aspects, the law is lagging behind technology. We are asking these questions because we want to know the attitude of the Security Bureau. If you can show us that you are very restrained and you have guidelines to tell us what you will not do, say, I won't know what sites you have visited and we can't read your WhatsApp messages, then you can reassure certain members and we will not have more questions. But you are not saying that. Because there is not such a law, you will not restrain yourself. From the angle of LEAs, of course, if there is not such a provision in the law, they can go all the way, meaning they want to prevent crimes, and so I'm going to watch all your WhatsApp messages every day, and I'm not going to hurt you, but I can also see that you have a naked chat with a small girl, so we will act on it. And supposing the police can pose themselves as a little girl, and so they can engage you in a naked chat, and after you have done that twice, you will be caught. And the council here is debating whether this should be allowed. now you want more powers, you want more resources for LEAs, and members ask questions. It is for the Security Bureau to reassure us and not just to brush aside our worries. And it's not very comforting just for you to say that the police will not break the law. Mr. Leung Yiu-chung, I support the adjournment motion by Mr. Nathan Law. When we consider this post, there are a few major worries. Number one, whether there will be abuse of police power. I told you examples just now. The people in Hong Kong are most worried about abuse of police power. I gave you 2 examples. I won't repeat them. And in fact, the police abuse their powers. But under SEC, you said there is a statutory body, the IPCC. And you also have the CAPO, which receives complaints. But the thing is, can they really deal with complaints? The answer is no. Had complaints been successfully tackled, the people would not have this feeling anymore that the police are abusing their power. All along, we had hoped that it would not be for the CAPO to investigate police officers, but still that is the case, and therefore we think there is this problem. Number 2, the political side. You said the police would not take out political prosecution. Well, of course, you won't be so stupid to say, look, I'm arresting you because of political reasons. There is no provision in the law to say you politically arrest people, and you are not as stupid as that. You will certainly invoke existing laws to arrest and prosecute people. But the application of the law may be for a different purpose. That is the crucial point. And sometimes it's up to you to frame a charge. And whether there is any political motive behind it, only you know. No third parties can be objective enough to point that out. But in recent years, we see that happening. So you are not allaying our fears. Why is it that your detection rate is so high and the crime rate is so low, and yet your popularity rating is so low? You have to answer that question. You have done a lot, but you are not held in high regard. Why? You have to relate this to abuse of power and political objectives. Plus, as our members are saying, why don't you go for internal deployment? It is now about 5 minutes before the end of the session. I will allow Dr. Fernando Zhang and Elizabeth Quat to speak, and then I will end the meeting. Dr. Fernando Zhang, I quoted figures about police power in Hong Kong, that we are in the first few positions around the world, but the Undersec gave us figures about other big cities, and he says we are not that many. He gave me figures saying for every 100,000 population in Hong Kong, there are 399 police officers. But if I may refer to 2013, the UN Drug and Crime Office released a report comparing police power throughout the world. Hong Kong ranked the 5th. At the time, for every 100,000 population, we had 450 police officers. Compared to 399 quoted by the Undersec, there is a distance. But as far as I know, we are first in Asia. We are 2 times more than Singapore. First, according to the UN, Russia ranks first. Second, Turkey. I don't know why we should have such a high proportion of police officers. preventing and investigating cybercrime, yes, we need appropriate police power. But if we are already first in Asia, and that is as long as police power is concerned, why do we need more posts? Why don't you deploy resources within the force? I haven't heard any clear explanation by the Undersec. We have 46 chief superintendents. Of course, all of them are required and they are capable. But if we continue to increase posts, where will we stop? We are gatekeepers for the public vis-à-vis public finances. Many members and myself are concerned whether the post would be abused. This is about the public's trust in the police, and I was asking about ICS work. The CICS did ask many questions. Every year he asks questions, but every year the irregularities continue. I have not heard how the Undersec has learned from CICS's reports so as to stop abuse of power by LEAs. Before these questions are answered, I cannot support the paper. Elizabeth Quat, 3 minutes. In fact, if members have questions, well, this is the Finance Committee. You should ask questions on the financial side so you can understand a policy clearly and why there is a funding request. But you can see Democrats exhausting their points and then they would go for motions to adjourn the meeting. They just don't want to carry on the discussion. Chairman, of course, I object to adjournment, but I'm the last speaking at this meeting. I want to point out that members' speeches are really unimaginable in my eyes because members of the Legislative Council are speaking about the law in a most uninformed way. And Dr. Fernando Zhang says if he asks Ms. Claudia Mo to say Ms. Mo should slap somebody, then he could be caught. Well, I think this is really ridiculous and it's misleading the public because this post is about cyber crime and it has nothing to do with what he is saying. He is talking nonsense. Ms. Mo says she is scared. Well, of course. If she doesn't even understand the law, then she should be scared. And probably she is always thinking of breaking the law. If you don't want to break the law, then why should you be scared? Fernando Zhang asked many questions, but then he supports adjournment. That's self-conflicting. Chairman, I really think that this is unimaginable. We can see pro-democratic members are putting politics before cybercrime. They choose to be blind to cyber threats, and I hope the public are discerning. We need to support the police in enforcing the law in a lawful way, and politics should not override livelihood needs. I will continue to support this post and also support the police in cracking down on cybercrime so Hong Kong will be one of the safest cities in the world. I don't think the police power is too big in Hong Kong. Thank you very much. This is all for today's meeting.